This episode of Life Trippin' is Stepping Onto the Road, Part 2, the second part of an interview about vulnerability with my friend Gayle Greenslade Ely. To trip or not to trip, that is still the question. So here's a thought I had after I put out part 1 of this interview. It makes a lot of sense to look both ways before stepping onto any road. Now, if that's a new thought for you, your kindergarten teacher probably didn't do her or his job. But in terms of how and whether to share our lives with others in some vulnerable way, Gayle and I weren't necessarily talking about wearing your heart on your sleeve, where anyone and everyone can just grab a piece of it. It makes sense. It's a form of wisdom, I think, to look both back and forward when considering what vulnerability might look like for you. What has served you well, or not, in the past? What might you change in the future? We begin part 2 with some conversation about what vulnerability looks like when you've been burned in the past.
Another question that this has led to, and I appreciate your guidance along the way in how some of these questions are shaped. And I'm thinking about, in particular, folks who, whether they're young, perhaps, and still learning what it means to be vulnerable, or perhaps they're at another stage of life and maybe, for example, they've been burned. They've given away, they've trusted, and really been hurt by that. They've made themselves vulnerable, and now they're at a point of contemplating. They realize, right, that they're missing something by not being vulnerable. But how do they begin to cultivate vulnerability, whether for the first time or to regrow it, if you will, in their lives?
Oh, I like that. I like that regrow, because we do get burned, and people who are vulnerable people, it doesn't mean that they don't get burned. The people that Brené Brown talks about, that she interviewed, who it displayed the characteristics of vulnerability, her observation about their attitude about that was that they understand that. They understand that that's a risk. But they also understand that the payoff for being vulnerable is so much greater. To have joy, to have real connection is, worth the risk of the pain that might come. And I think that's really important. How do you cultivate vulnerability? And it is practice gratitude and joy. And that, practicing gratitude sounds so easy. Okay, I say thank you for this, that, and the other thing. And I'll be honest with you, I had trouble with practicing gratitude, because I would always go to the place of, if I was thankful that I had a roof under my head and I had heat in my house, what did that say about the people who didn't?
Yep.
So I would be like, I'm thankful for this, but oh gosh, almost feeling guilty.
Right. Yeah, right. You immediately jump to those who don't have whatever you have.
Yeah. And yet when you're around people who don't have a lot, particularly, and I have not been on the mission field in other countries, but I have heard missionaries come back and talk about the gratitude that the people that seemingly have nothing, they still have gratitude, and so it makes me think, okay, I want to find a way to be truly grateful. And interestingly, gratitude and joy are really connected. So, and if you think about it, joy, and you often hear about happiness, everybody wants to be happy. Well, happiness often is tied to your circumstances. Joy is more of a way of being that gains strength when it's connected to practicing gratitude.
So, for example, using your explanation definition there, and I think that's a really good and powerful distinction to help folks make the difference between joy and happiness. when I heard your description, part of what I thought about is that someone who is happy, it's unlikely that they can be both happy and sad. So if something sad happens, the happiness is gone, but someone who's joyful can be joyful and yet also encompass within their joyful, grateful mindset or worldview, sadness, loss, grieving, and the other pains that come with life.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a really good example is when you lose someone who's very close to you. You were vulnerable enough to expose yourself to real love. And then you lose that person, perhaps through death, say. If you hear people talk about, particularly if they've been together in a relationship for a long period of time, they have a profound sadness. However, they wouldn't have given up that love in order not to experience the sadness.
Yep. I've even thought that, and I know this is a little lesser degree, but I've certainly thought that in terms of pets that we've had in our lives who, when they pass away or we have to have them put to sleep, which is just a tremendously painful experience. And in that moment, it's so painful that it's hard to keep perspective. But when you look back and you think, well, is all of this offset by the good and the enjoyment that we had with them? And the answer for me has always been yes.
Yeah, there's an old saying, it is better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all.
It was in a movie somewhere, wasn't it? I swear.
I don't know. It sounds like a movie, doesn't it? But, and remember earlier on, we were talking about foreboding joy, that joy was like, I don't know, this isn't going to last, So I like this phrase that the shudder of vulnerability that comes with joy is an invitation to practice gratitude. So I'm going to say that again. The shudder of vulnerability that comes with joy is an invitation to practice gratitude. So when that foreboding joy comes, you have this sense of foreboding joy, practice gratitude.
It sounds so easy.
Right.
Although, as you've already pointed out, really practicing gratitude, really cultivating a mindset of gratitude is at least in part, there's a real intentionality that has to go with it, I think, and developing habits and practices of that practice. So what for you, for example, what are some things that have helped you practice gratitude?
Originally, I said that, I had trouble practicing gratitude because I think about all the people who don't have anything. I have shifted that to much more, I think, a more spiritual approach to gratitude, which is waking up each morning and just being thankful that I'm awake, just being thankful that I have a sense that, my view of God is with me. And, as I am more vulnerable, being thankful that invites other people to be more vulnerable. So it invites a deeper connection.
And a sense clearly of getting to share your gifts in the world and whatever you see as your purpose here in this life, right?
And I think that for me is the ultimate gratitude, is being allowed to and having the ability to share the gifts that I've been given. They're not ones I cultivated or made. I guess I could cultivate them, but I didn't create them necessarily. But to be able to share those gifts I feel really, really grateful for that. What that means is I had to figure out what my gifts are, and I had to be willing to be vulnerable in order to share them, because not everybody's going to necessarily accept them.
And I'm going to go back to a comment you made earlier about developing nations, places, other places in the world that are much poorer than where we live, and for most of us, than most of the people we know. I remember a little story that I read, and I have spent some time in Latin America, but this was a story I read about a quote from a man who lives in Haiti, And somebody asked him about his gratitude, and he said, in Haiti, we don't have very much, but if I wake up in the morning and there's a little bit of tea, I'm very grateful that I have a little bit of tea. So it's some of it is a matter of scale, we might want to say, but in the end, it really isn't a matter of scale. It's a matter of appreciating whatever it is that we have and not being focused on what we don't have.
Yeah, there you go. And I think the other thing to remember about joy is joy comes in the ordinary moments. It's not about extraordinary things happening. When you do lose someone who's close to you, it's the ordinary things that you really miss. It's the conversations, it's the smiles, it's the laughter. Those are the things that you miss.
That's striking to me because it seems quite often that whether it be parents or couples or whoever else it might be, sometimes go out of their way to create these extraordinary experiences as though they have to do that on a regular basis or they won't have joy. And so your comment about joy really coming in those ordinary moments, and I would say certainly my experience personally and with others has reflected the truth of what you just said, and it's those little things. You shared a little bit of your own story, and I was wondering what else you might like to tell us. Whatever you would be willing to share with us, Gayle, would be awesome.
Well, sure. Thank you for asking. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a recovering perfectionist. And that really rang clear to me when I was in a leadership position. I was working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture for 23 years. And I was in a number of leadership positions and was basically just about ready to be named head of staff of one of the regional offices here in Atlanta, where I live, when I got a call that shocked me and sent my life off into a direction that I couldn't have even imagined. And the call was telling me that I was being investigated for creating a hostile work environment. And after the shock wore off, and after I got home, although I don't know exactly how I got home, and after I spent days in bed, and after a 6-month investigation, I was basically told, you're not going to get this job. And in fact, we're going to send you somewhere else, or you can retire if you want to. And so I did. I retired and spent several months not doing much because I was in a lot of pain. But when I started asking myself some questions, I was like, what happened? Why did this happen? What am I supposed to learn from this? I mean, I might as well learn something from it because it's painful. I might as well learn something from it. And the two most important questions I started asking myself was, who am I and who do I want to be? Because it became clear to me that I had lost my way and I was completely ungrounded in who I was and being in alignment with the values that I had. Because I had, I had become a perfectionist at work. And what that meant was it had to be done my way or it wasn't going to be right. And when I was leading the staff of people and pretending to delegate things to them, and I say that pretending because I didn't take it off my plate because I was a perfectionist, I did become that, kind of tyrant type of person that wasn't really who I was. And so I actually hired a coach at that time who asked me one of the most significant questions that I've ever been asked. She asked me, well, what were you thinking? and she didn't ask it that way. That's
right.
Snarky, but she asked in a very compassionate way, right? What were you thinking? And I said, I was thinking that the entire success or failure of the organization was on me. Wow. That was not true, but that's what I was thinking. And so that led me to believe I had to be perfect. Otherwise, the whole thing was going down. And And so, I went through that coaching. I ended up becoming a coach myself because of that experience. And I share that story with people all the time to let them know that you can survive and even thrive after devastating experiences like that. And that really alludes to the second way that we can cultivate vulnerability. Talked about gratitude and joy. The second one is to declare to yourself that you are enough. Just the way you are. You are enough. It's about practicing self-compassion. It's about recognizing a common humanity that we all suffer and we all have feelings of inadequacy, and that is a shared human experience. And then it's about taking a balanced approach to negative emotions. So, when you have these negative emotions, not suppressing them, but not exaggerating them either.
But not fixating on them, or as you...
Right. Not fixing it. Recognize them. Don't suppress them, because then, suppression usually means that you think about grief for a minute. If you suppress grief, it's going to come out in other ways.
Oh, yeah.
Okay?
Oh, yeah.
And so when you suppress these negative emotions that you're not enough, it's going to come out in other ways. For me, it came out in perfectionism.
I picture like opening up a house on the nice first really nice warm day of spring, and opening windows and doors and fresh air comes in. I don't know why that image just came to me.
Yeah.
And somebody could say to themselves and begin to believe you are enough. It's kind of like opening up that house and the windows and doors of their lives.
Yeah. Yeah, or it's like taking a big, deep sigh of relief.
Yep.
It's declare that you're enough and believe that you are enough.
Laying down that huge, heavy burden.
Yeah.
Right?
Lay down the measuring stick.
I may have to rename this episode after we talk.
Put down that measuring stick.
Yep.
Yeah.
So were there? I want to make sure we got to the things, because you mentioned we actually came back to one of the things about.
Yeah, those were the two big things about
good.
ways to cultivate vulnerability.
Good.
Vulnerability is really allowing yourself to be really seen.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I think one of the things that scares us about vulnerability is because we have such a desire to be in connection with other people. What scares us is that if we are really seen, maybe somebody won't want to be connected to us. Maybe we won't be deserving of love and belonging.
Yeah.
Here's something else really powerful, Dana, as we kind of wind up. In her research, when Brené Brown was talking with people who have a strong sense of love and belonging, and those who were struggling with it, she only came up with one factor that made the difference between having a strong sense of love and belonging and with struggling with it. You want to know what that is?
Yeah, I think I do. I know I do. I'm thinking there are lots of other folks who might want to know that too.
Okay. People who have a strong sense of love and belonging believe that they are worth having love and belonging. They have a sense of worthiness.
All I can think of in this moment, and this is going to sound terrible in a way, I guess, but I'm thinking of the old, which was it? Was it Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure? We're not worthy.
Yeah.
And but that's also kind of a mantra that people may not consciously give themselves, but it's a real thing, clearly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have just a minute more, would you tell me very briefly, maybe something that's been really helpful for you in terms of coaching someone around vulnerability? Any particular questions that you've asked, or anything about that process that's been particularly meaningful and powerful?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I'll tell you a quick story about one of my clients. When I start a coaching engagement with a client, I always have what I call a visioning session. However long our relationship's going to be in coaching, what would you like what would success look like? What's your dream of what's going to be different after we spend this time together? And I was coaching a woman who had been laid off from a job after working there for 15 years. Her job was very much a part of her identity. She was very good at it. She had a big helping spirit, and a lot of her job was helping people in the organization. And she got laid off. And when she came to me, she realized that confident self that she had was gone because she had gotten laid off. So I asked her, we worked together for about 6 or 7 months. And I said, at the beginning, I said, well, what's going to be different when, at the end of this period for you to be able to say, wow, this was a real success. And she had the most interesting image. And she's a woman in her 40s, probably. She said, I picture myself in a big poofy dress, jumping down on a trampoline with the dress going up and down. You can picture that? You picture that? And I got a big smile on my face. And I was like, oh, wow, that is incredible. That is incredible. So we worked on, her self-image and her. And honestly, Dana, I don't think we talk about this very much, but when people get laid off, that connection that we have had and developed and that is so important, as we've been talking about, gets cut.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not of our own doing. It gets cut. And so, when that pain happens, gosh, who wants to be vulnerable? Who wants to go back into that? Who has, she just didn't have that confidence. And so we worked a lot around her own self-image, and we worked around some work that you and I are familiar with called gremlin work, where, what is that voice inside of you saying? The one that usually says, I'm not good enough, what does that voice say? And she actually, on her very own, came up with an image of her gremlin and named it. And I said, but where would you like that gremlin to reside? It doesn't need to be sitting right by you on your shoulder telling you you're not good enough. And she said, he's going to be in my boots. Yeah. And whenever he starts to sneak out of the boots, I'm going to say, you get back in there. That's where you live. You're not coming out. So, that work around that voice in our heads that tells us we're not good enough, I think is really, really important to us being able to cultivate vulnerability.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Gayle, this has been absolutely wonderful. I have one last question that I would like to ask you that takes a very different tack from where we've been going up to this point. And this is just something that I'm doing at the end of each podcast for fun. And also to help folks connect a little bit more with you. Oh, but before I do that, let me ask you this. If someone hears this podcast and they would like to reach out to you, and because they've heard you and they said, wow, Gayle said some things that just really struck a chord with me, how would they find you best? How would you like them to reach you?
Well, I have a website. My company is called Total Life Leadership. And my website is www.total-life-leadership.com. They can go to that website, and there's a way to connect to me and send me an email. So that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Okay, great. And I can also post that along with the link to the Brené Brown TED Talk on my Life Trippin website. So
great.
I'll look forward to hearing from you about folks who have found you from here. I hope that really is a wonderful connection. So here's my last question for you. If you had to be either wind or a wave, which would you be and why?
Wind or wave? I would be wind. And that is because part of the work that I've done through all of the coaching that I've had is to really identify who I am and what are my strengths. Because as you know, Dana, there are all different kinds of coaches, and coaches, have different strengths, and they have different ways of doing coaching. And so when I engage with people, I want them to know this is the kind of coach I am. This is the kind of support I can provide for you. And these are the 4 words I use to describe myself. And by the way, anybody who's listening, if you can come up with 4 words to describe yourself, that is absolutely wonderful because, that gives you a sense of who you are, a sense of your purpose, and it gives you an opportunity to be a little vulnerable and tell people who you are. So here are the 4 words I use to describe myself: kind, calm, supportive, and insightful. What that reminds me of when I think of wind that kind of whispers alongside of us. Sometimes it's not calm. Sometimes it's like a hurricane. But a lot of times, and that's the wind I'm thinking about, is that that calm wind that just rustles through your hair. You can hear it in the leaves, rustling through the leaves. And you can't see it, but you can feel it. And so that's why I would be the wind.
Well, that's our episode. The more I hear it, the more I believe Brené Brown's statement that vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. If any of those things seem to be lacking in your life, well, maybe vulnerability is a place to start. If you're willing to take a chance to see where that might lead you, please reach out. Send an email to dana@lifetrippin.com, and we can talk about the possibility of some free life coaching and maybe recording a session for use on a future episode of Life Trippin'. The theme music is Road Trip by Phil Rivas, used on a Creative Commons license. And don't forget to look at the Life Trippin' website for more information about guests, upcoming episodes, and ways to contact me, Dana Sutton, the Life Trip Coach. Go to www.lifetrippin.com. And until next time, keep on trippin'.